Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're really grappling with some complex material. Heavy stuff, nuanced, and honestly pretty essential for understanding where things stand globally right now.
Absolutely. We've got a stack of sources here, analyses covering, well, two major areas that seem separate, but as we'll see, are deeply connected.
That's right. We're looking at a high-profile political assassination in the US, a real domestic tragedy, and then exploring its frankly kind of bizarre links to these huge shifts in global power. And it's all viewed through the sharp perspective of international observer Mookie Tenenbaum.
Yeah, and our goal, our mission today is to sort of knit these things together. We need to unpack how this intense political polarization in the U.S. connects with what feels like a genuine crisis for free expression, especially in, the legacy media.
And how that mirrors the bigger picture globally.
Yes, exactly. We'll look at the rising tensions, the friction between Russia and NATO, and then we really need to dissect this new military pact in the Middle East and Asia. Sounds, well, dangerous. We're trying to find that common thread, the why behind it all.
Right. And Tenenbaum's analysis really helps clarify why these things matter beyond just the headlines. So we're covering the fallout from the Charlie Kirk assassination, huge shockwaves in American politics, and then we'll pivot to these two really critical geopolitical updates. They signal, well, a rapid reshuffling of global alliances.
It's a deep dive into obsolescence, really. Old media, old ways of doing politics, old alliances. Maybe they're just not fit for purpose anymore.
Let's get into it. This definitely needs a detailed look. Okay, let's start with Charlie Kirk himself. For anyone not familiar, he wasn't just another conservative voice. He was young, religious, yes, but, and this is important, not really a fundamentalist.
Right. He basically built a movement aimed at bringing right-wing ideas, structured debate, back onto American university campuses, places that had become, let's face it, overwhelmingly dominated by left-leaning thought.
And his influence, it seems, came a lot from his style, didn't it?
Totally. The sources describe him as a rare bird, an outlier in today's really nasty political climate. He was known as an excellent debater. But the key was he never got aggressive, never raised his voice.
Ah.
Yeah, apparently he'd often try to, embrace his opponent, physically or intellectually, after a debate, sort of showing respect for the argument itself, even if he completely disagreed with their views.
Wow, that's almost unheard of now. That level of civility feels like it's vanished. And that must be why his platform became so effective, maybe even threatening to some.
It seemed so. The sources are clear his political importance had really shot up. He became crucial to Donald Trump's efforts, apparently having an influence maybe comparable to someone like Elon Musk in the last election, especially with younger voters.
So a direct line to Trump.
Yeah, personal relationship. Trump reportedly admired his knack for explaining conservative ideas clearly, even when facing hostile crowds.
And this ability, it was grounded in his core beliefs, particularly about free speech.
Oh, absolutely. He was described as almost a First Amendment fanatic. Two core things. The state shouldn't be involved in religion, and absolute freedom of expression.
And how did that play out, especially with people who opposed him?
Well, that's the fascinating part. He strongly defended the right of his opponents to speak, even if what they said was offensive to him personally, like flag burning. He might hate the act, but he'd defend the right to do it.
He believed the principle had to apply universally.
Precisely. Even for ideas we find, repulsive.
There's that anecdote about his debate style, right? It really captures this approach.
Yeah, the one where he was debating a Lebanese woman about her anti-Israel views.
That's the one, instead of just attacking her.
Right, he posed this kind of rhetorical question, designed to make her think about personal freedom. He asked her, simply, as a woman, where would you rather live for maximum freedom and safety? Iran, Saudi Arabia, or Israel?
Not trying to score points, but forcing a comparison.
Exactly. It wasn't about derivatives or, crushing the opponent. It was about persuasion, trying to genuinely change minds, not just win the shouting match.
And that allowed him to take his message outside the usual conservative bubble?
Yeah, to build his own media network and actually go into those liberal universities, the enemy territory, and have the discussion, rather than just preaching to the choir.
Okay, so now we shift to the grim irony of his death, the killer, Tyler Robinson. An unknown figure, apparently, but clearly very capable.
Highly capable. And his background immediately threw a wrench into the initial narrative, didn't it?
It really did. He came from a Mormon family in Utah, a conservative state. His father had connections to law enforcement, maybe a sheriff or deputy sheriff.
So, not the background you might initially expect. And he clearly had training, The sources say he learned to handle weapons from a young age.
And he was good. Exceptionally good.
Frighteningly good. The analysis confirms it was one shot. Hit the jugular from about 200 meters away. That takes incredible skill, practice. This wasn't some, random act of rage up close.
But the motive, that's where it gets really murky, isn't it? The initial story, the one that spread like wildfire,
Was that Robinson was anti-trans, and he targeted Kirk because Kirk held conservative views on things like gay marriage and gender issues. A straightforward ideological hit.
simple, politically charged, but then the contradiction emerged.
Yeah, the fact that Robinson was living with someone who was not only his roommate, but also apparently his lover, and this person was gay and planning to transition to female.
Which just blows this simple anti-trans motive out of the water, or at least makes it incredibly complicated.
Completely. How does that square? If the motive was anti-trans hate, what was going on in his personal life? Did the media just ignore that complexity because the simpler narrative fit better?
It raises serious questions. Mookie Tenenbaum's assessment is interesting here. He saw Robinson less as a sort of high-minded political assassin, like maybe old-school anarchists.
Right. Not an idealist killer, more like a perturbed kid. That's the phrase used.
Yeah.
High IQ, apparently was expected to be a professor, but he dropped out of university.
So, intelligent but troubled. And we're left guessing because he was arrested and immediately invoked his right to remain silent.
Pled the fifth, yeah.
Yeah.
So no confession, no explanation from him. We're left with this deeply ambiguous picture. Suggests something maybe more psychological than purely political.
And the legal context of where he was caught is also significant. He drove a long way, 450 kilometers.
Yeah, good distance. But crucially, he didn't leave Utah.
Yeah.
Which seems odd if he was really trying hard to escape.
Why does Utah matter so much here?
Because Utah has the death penalty.
Yeah.
And it's not just theoretical. They were the first state to bring back executions after the Supreme Court lifted a temporary ban, and they still have, controversially, the option of a firing squad.
Wow.
So if Robinson had just driven across the border into, say, California, a state without the death penalty, getting him extradited back to Utah to face capital punishment would have been a massive legal battle.
Yeah.
Years of appeals, huge public spectacle.
A major hurdle for prosecutors.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
the fact that he didn't make that relatively simple move, just cross the state line, suggests something. Either it was a huge tactical mistake for someone supposedly so intelligent.
Or maybe on some level he wasn't trying that hard to avoid the ultimate consequence. Maybe he wanted the swift justice Utah could offer.
It's pure speculation, of course. But it adds another layer of strangeness to the whole thing.
Yeah.
Hashtag 1.3, the media fallout, and the free speech vortex.
Okay, moving from the crime to the immediate aftermath. Political violence isn't new in the U.S., sadly. Lincoln, Garfield, Reagan shot, attempts on Trump. A long, dark history.
True.
Mm-hmm.
And usually after a shooting like this, you get the same old debate, right?
Blame the guns or blame the person pulling the trigger.
Exactly. The analogy used in one source was like saying, I gain weight because my spoon is too small, instead of looking at what you're eating, focusing on the tool, not the user's intent.
But this time, the conversation shifted really quickly, away from gun control and straight towards free speech.
Yeah, because the assassination triggered this almost immediate cancellation cascade in the media.
It was incredibly fast. A commentator on a big cable news network.
Yeah.
Gone, practically overnight.
Fired for suggesting Kirk somehow deserved what happened, which immediately raised alarms about, where are the lines of acceptable speech, even if it's vile.
And then the Jimmy Kimmel situation. Pushed out by Disney ABC after making a joke about the assassin's conservative parents.
Right. That became a huge public fight over so-called cancel culture.
So these high-profile firings, big names, big salaries. What's really driving it? There seem to be two main arguments floating around.
There are. The first is the political one. Donald Trump argues he's been unfairly attacked for years, and now that he has influence again, he's actively going after media figures who were particularly vicious towards him when he was out of power.
And you can see why people might believe that, given the history. But the analysis we're drawing on from Mookie Tenenbaum points somewhere else. It cuts through the politics to economic reality.
Yeah, Tenenbaum focuses on something maybe more fundamental and maybe even darker for the networks. It's about business. It's about the audience hemorrhaging.
They're losing viewers.
Massively. Kimmel, for instance, apparently lost something like 40% of his audience over the previous year. And the argument is, why? Because the jokes, especially the constant targeting of Trump, just got boring, repetitive, predictable.
Alienating half the country.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
If you constantly attack one side, you lose that audience. But the core issue, Tenenbaum argues, is technology and demographics. Broadcast TV is, frankly, dying. The average viewer for those kinds of shows is apparently 72 years old.
72.
Yeah. Meanwhile, you've got AI, you've got YouTube, TikTok, streaming. The whole media landscape is being democratized, fragmented. It's technology that's killing their old business model, maybe even more than Trump's influence.
So the firings are less about principle, maybe, and more about sheer economic panic.
That's the argument. They're desperate. But the real kicker, the thing that apparently forced the network's hand with the late-night hosts, wasn't just low ratings. It was the affiliates.
Local TV stations.
Exactly. The ones that actually broadcast the national shows in different cities and regions. Many of these serve more conservative areas. And they basically revolted.
How so?
They told the national networks, we won't air your show if this host stays. Collectively, that meant potentially losing 80% of the national audience overnight. It used to be the networks in New York and LA called the shots.
And now the local stations are dictating terms.
It was a massive flip. The local, often more conservative base effectively forced the hand of the national network. That shows a fundamental power shift away from the traditional media centers. Hashtag tag 1.4, the erosion of civilized debate.
This whole mess, the killing, the media meltdown, it really brings us back to that fundamental question. Why do we even have free expression? What's the practical point?
And Mookie Tenenbaum offers a really strong, almost pragmatic argument here. It's not just some lofty ideal. Freedom of expression has a practical, almost selfish benefit.
Which is?
It lets you know who people really are, what they actually think. If you censor them, if you force their ideas underground, you don't know who's dangerous, who holds extreme views, who might be plotting something.
So letting them speak, even offensively, is actually safer, because at least you know where they stand.
Arguably, yes. Driving hateful ideas into the shadows lets them fester and grow without challenge, without sunlight. It's potentially much more dangerous in the long run.
But that benefit seems completely lost in today's public square, especially online.
Oh, totally. Platforms like X, Instagram, constructive debate feels almost impossible. It's mostly just insults, threats, people yelling into their own echo chambers.
Social media gives a huge megaphone to people who think they're important, but maybe they're just shouting at others who already agree, amplifying all the negativity.
Exactly. It creates this toxic feedback loop that poisons everything. And it's worth contrasting the U.S. approach, the First Amendment, with what happens elsewhere.
Like in the UK or Spain.
Yeah, the sources point out how restrictive things are there. People can actually be arrested for things said in private WhatsApp chats or social media posts critical of certain groups or politicians. It really highlights how unique and maybe fragile the American approach to speech is.
But even in the US, it's not an absolute free-for-all, right? There are limits.
Definitely. The Supreme Court uses the time, place, and manner test. You have the right to protest, sure, but not inside someone's house at 3 a.m. You can't disrupt emergency services.
And the classic example, you can't yell fire in a crowded theater if there's no fire.
Right, because that creates immediate danger. And that test is crucial now for the digital age. For example, calls for violence like chanting death to Jews or death to Arabs, things heard at some university protests that's generally not protected speech. It crosses the line into incitement, threatening others' safety.
But burning a flag, even though it deeply offends many people,
is still considered protected political speech because in itself, it doesn't physically harm anyone. It's purely symbolic expression. The courts have also carved out exceptions for things like, professional confidentiality, lawyer-client, priest-penitent, and obscenity.
So the challenge now is applying these old constitutional principles to new problems, like online harassment, doxing.
Exactly. How do you apply time, place, and manner to a coordinated digital mob? It's a huge legal and social challenge.
Okay, let's shift gears now from the fractured, heated domestic scene in the U.S. to the global stage. It feels like some of the same themes, disruption, ambiguity, are playing out internationally as well.
They really are. Let's look at these geopolitical updates, starting with Russia and NATO. There's been some, confusing aggression lately.
What kind of incidents are we talking about?
We've seen a pattern. Russian drones flying into Polish airspace, into Romanian airspace, both NATO countries, and getting shot down.
Yeah.
Then Russian jets flying very aggressively, buzzing Estonian airspace. Again, NATO member, former Soviet sphere.
Poland, Romania, Estonia, all on NATO's eastern flank. But the analysis points out a paradox here, right? What's Putin actually trying to gain?
That's the million-dollar question. because militarily, it doesn't make immediate sense. Russia right now probably doesn't have the capacity for a full-scale invasion of a country like Poland.
Mm.
The logistics, the manpower,
Mm.
it's just not there, especially with the ongoing war in Ukraine.
So these provocations, they just seem to make European countries feel more threatened.
Exactly. Which forces them to spend more on defense, buy more advanced U.S. military gear, and ultimately strengthens NATO's overall budget and readiness. It seems counterproductive for Russia in the short term.
So if it's not about immediate military gain, what are the theories? The source material speculates a bit.
Yes, several possibilities. One, is Putin just testing NATO? Probing their reaction time, seeing how they respond? Do they use local defenses, or does it trigger a bigger alliance response?
Sure.
Testing the tripwires, basically.
Okay, reconnaissance of a sort. What else?
Second theory, is he trying to build leverage for future negotiations? Maybe banking on a political shift, like, say, if Trump returns to the White House. These aggressive acts could become bargaining chips later, something he can offer to stop doing in return for concessions.
Creating problems now to solve them later, potentially.
Could be. And the third theory is maybe the most interesting geopolitically. Is this display of aggression actually aimed eastward towards China?
Why China?
Well, Russia and China have this complex partnership. China's a senior partner economically. Russia might feel the need to constantly show it's still a major independent military power, not just a resource supplier for Beijing. These NATO-baiting actions demonstrate potency, maintain some balance in that crucial relationship.
So it's less about attacking NATO and more about posturing for China.
It's a plausible theory, especially since the actions don't seem to achieve any clear military goal against NATO and actually seem to harm Russia's interest by strengthening the alliance. The motives remain really unclear, likely complex, and not purely military.
All right, let's move south to the Middle East. Before we get to the big Pact Mookie Tenenbaum highlighted, what's the latest on the ground in the Gaza conflict?
Well, reports suggest Israel now controls maybe 70% of Gaza City itself. They're clearing the rest, but it's slow, difficult work. House-to-house fighting against Hamas fighters using ambushes, booby traps, tunnels.
It's attritional urban warfare.
Exactly. And the slow pace might also be partly strategic, maybe giving Hamas more chances to surrender, or perhaps trying to minimize further harm to any remaining hostages, although that's incredibly difficult. Information is tightly controlled, of course.
And speaking of hostages, there was that very worrying report, unverified but shared by former President Trump.
Yes. Trump claimed publicly that maybe only 10 hostages are still alive. That's down significantly from estimates a couple of months ago. We don't know if he has real intelligence or if it was just speculation, but it casts a very dark shadow over everything. Makes the stakes even higher for any negotiations.
And beyond Gaza itself, Israel seems to be widening its actions.
Definitely. We're seeing ongoing strikes against Hezbollah in Lebanon, attacks targeting Houthi assets in Yemen, and increasingly sharp rhetoric threats towards Syria and Iran. It feels like a broader regional recalibration, especially after that recent significant attack that targeted Qatar.
But the single most significant event, according to Mookie Tenenbaum's analysis this week, wasn't any of those military actions. It was a diplomatic move.
That's right, the Mutual Defense Pact signed between Pakistan and Saudi Arabia. This isn't just routine paperwork. Tenenbaum views it as a really serious, potentially dangerous development.
Okay, unpack that. Why is this pact considered so dangerous? What are the immediate ripple effects?
Well, first, geopolitically, it pushes India much closer to Israel. They share a common concern, even an existential one, about this emerging Pakistan-Saudi axis. For India, this pact kind of confirms a long-held fear.
So it forces new alignments. But the core danger
Is nuclear. Pakistan, as we know, has nuclear weapons, the so-called Islamic bomb, developed outside the main international treaties. And the reporting suggests they're seriously discussing providing a nuclear umbrella for Saudi Arabia.
Wow, a nuclear guarantee from Pakistan backed by Saudi money. That sounds incredibly destabilizing.
It really is. It fundamentally alters the regional power balance. And the observer, Tenenbaum, repeats this chilling prediction that's been around for a while. If nuclear weapons are ever used again, the most likely flashpoint isn't U.S.-Russia, but probably Pakistan-India, or maybe even Pakistan-Israel.
And this pact makes that scenario feel closer.
It brings several volatile elements together. You've got Saudi Arabia's immense wealth, you've got Pakistan's existing nuclear arsenal and delivery systems, and then you add in advanced technology, including sophisticated U.S.-developed AI systems that have been sold to the Saudis for their own modernization efforts.
Yeah. So U.S. tech, Saudi money, Pakistani nukes, all potentially intertwined now, and Pakistan already has a close relationship with China.
Precisely. It creates this incredibly dangerous mix. It potentially allows Saudi Arabia to achieve nuclear deterrence indirectly, bypasses traditional Western nonproliferation efforts, and links directly into China's sphere of influence.
This pact hasn't gotten much mainstream attention in the West, has it?
Not nearly enough, according to the analysis, but it's seen as a potentially game-changing agreement that significantly raises the nuclear stakes across Asia and the Middle East. It really shows how, while we might be focused on polarization at home, these massive realignments, potentially very dangerous ones, are happening quickly overseas. Hashtag tag outro. We have covered a huge amount of ground today, really guided by those sharp observations from Mookie Tenenbaum. We went from a heartbreaking assassination in the U.S. and its ripple effects through media and free speech debates, driven, it seems, by economic and technological decay, all the way to military posturing in Europe, and this truly significant new defense pact potentially reshaping the nuclear landscape in Asia and the Middle East.
Yeah, and the core takeaway for you, the learner, I think, is this. Look at domestic politics, look at international relations. The whole environment is just intensely polarized and disrupted right now. The old structures, whether it's legacy media, traditional political norms, even long-standing alliances, they seem to be buckling. They're being rapidly dismantled or just made irrelevant by technology and these new shifting power blocks.
The rules are changing faster than we can keep up. The old ways of conducting ourselves in debate and diplomacy seem inadequate.
Which leads us to that final thought, something for you to really chew on. We've talked about how the traditional rules for civil debate, for media, for global security seem to be becoming obsolete. So the question is, what institutions, what structures do have the resilience to withstand this level of disruption? Beyond something fundamental like the First Amendment's legal protection, what can actually hold?
What new frameworks might we need to even think about building to find stability when the old pillars seem to be crumbling around us?
Exactly. That's the big question to grapple with as you try to make sense of this incredibly fast-changing world.
A really critical discussion. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.